He sat in a softly lit studio, shoulders squared yet relaxed, as if bracing for a confession decades in waiting. The camera's red light blinked, and the familiar theme of Bonanza faded into the background. Dirk Blocker, son of the late Dan Blocker, better known to millions as Haas Cartwright, cleared his throat and leaned forward. At 67, he was about to shatter the silence that had surrounded his father's legacy since that sudden heart attack in 1972. When the producer whispered rolling, Dirk drew a slow breath and said, "Today feels like the day I finally tell Dad's real story, warts and all." Those four words rippled through the room like a pebble dropped in still water, promising revelations no fan had ever dared imagine. Born in Los Angeles in 1957, Dirk grew up amid the whirlwind of his father's rising fame. Even as a toddler, he remembered the towering figure stomping through their ranch-style home, boisterous laughter booming down the hallway. Dan Blocker was a gentle giant off-screen, his booming baritone giving way to shy hugs and bedtime prayers. Yet behind the warm smile and trademark suspenders lay a man navigating the precarious line between Hollywood showmanship and family devotion. Dirk's earliest recollection was of following his father onto the set of Bonanza, gripping Haas's boot as horses stamped and cameras rolled. That world felt magical until it wasn't. Dirk describes how whispers began in the studio commissary, tension between Dan and the network, scripts that felt more restrictive by the season, demands of filming 6 episodes a week. "My father never complained," Dirk recalls, voice quiet. "But I saw him at home, removing his makeup and wiping phantom tears. He'd tell my siblings and me, 'Acting is a gift, but family is my purpose.'" Those words, once comforting, later haunted him. At 16, Dirk learned that hero worship comes with a price: public idol, private struggle. In his late teens, Dirk pursued acting himself, driven by admiration yet dogged by comparison. He landed small roles on police dramas, leaning into Haas-like charm, but never escaping the shadow. "I carried his name like a banner and a burden," he admits, flicking a glance at a sepia photograph of father and son on their family ranch. By his mid-20s, Dirk stepped back from acting, choosing instead a life of relative obscurity, college teaching, and volunteer firefighting. "I needed to find Dirk, not Haas Jr.," he explains. For 40 years, he kept that distance, honoring his father's memory by protecting it from tabloid spin. But grief has a way of echoing across decades. Last year, Dirk visited the old Bonanza set when it reopened as a heritage museum. Walking through the reconstructed Ponderosa living room, he was overwhelmed by a wave of nostalgia and sorrow. Childhood laughter entwined with the sound of that tragic heart monitor beep, signaling his father's final collapse. Dirk stood alone where Haas once stood, hand on the mantle, and felt tears he thought long denied. He realized then that fans had only ever known the gentle giant, never the man behind the suspenders, the man who fought exhaustion, network politics, and unspoken health concerns to give the world hope. On camera, Dirk's tone shifts, somber, resolute. "For years I stayed silent, believing his public persona was enough," he says. But the complete story, the struggles, the setbacks, the heroism, deserves telling. He reveals that Dan battled undiagnosed heart issues for seasons, enduring chest pains between takes to keep production on schedule. Neither network nor co-stars knew the full extent, as Haas refused to show weakness. At home, he slept in recliners to ease strain, slipped into cardiologists' offices between filming, and scribbled medical notes in margins of scripts. Dirk's admission stuns viewers who grew up embracing Haas's simple wisdom on Sunday nights. He leans closer, voice softening. "Dad taught me to stand tall, but he never let us see the weight he carried. I'm here to honor his courage, not just as Haas Cartwright, but as Dan Blocker, a man who lived and died for his family." He pauses, eyes glistening. "Today, I set the record straight. This is my father's untold story. One of my clearest memories of my father came just days before his final heart attack on the Bonanza set. I was 17, perched on the edge of a wooden prop bench near the Ponderosa barn. My father, Dan, limped onto the stage, clutching his chest but determined to finish the scene. He propped himself on a fence rail, artificial sunshine falling over his suspenders as he delivered lines with the same gravitas he brought to our bedtime stories. Despite the lingering pain behind his broad smile, he never once complained or asked for a retake. Producers watched from the wings, anxious, but Haas carried on until the director finally called cut. In that moment, I grasped the immense personal cost of his dedication. Later that night, I found him in the motorhome, wrapping a heating pad in a stiff grocery bag. I reached out to help, but he waved me off, patting my arm. "Go to bed, son. We've got a big day tomorrow." His face was etched with pain lines I'd never seen before, traces of private battles hidden behind a public persona. As I left, I heard him murmur to himself, "Just another day." Those words echoed in my mind when, 2 days later, the director announced his collapse and the set fell silent. Grief hit me in waves. A university in Texas offered me a creative writing scholarship. My heart should have leapt, but I felt tethered by sorrow. Instead of packing, I spent nights poring over his medical reports, letters he'd pinned in the margins of scripts, a private record of the man behind the suspenders. My world had tilted, and I knew the only way forward was understanding him fully. College gave new purpose. I studied literature by day and volunteered at a fire department by night. The roar of the engine and the crackle of flames contrasted sharply with Hollywood's fragile glamour. Teaching high school students revealed a passion for mentorship that echoed my father's guidance. Firefighting honed a resilience and teamwork as heroic as any on-screen stunt. Slowly, I forged a path distinct from his, one grounded in real-world service. Yet the blocker name followed me like a shadow. Auditions ended in polite rejections. Nice pedigree, but we're looking for something fresh. In that rejection, I found relief. My calling lay not in acting, but in cultivating character, on stage in classrooms and on the front line of emergencies. For decades, reruns of Bonanza played without tethering me to the past. Haas's big-hearted wisdom felt remote, a cherished note I admired from afar. Last summer, the old Paramount Chapel reopened as a Bonanza museum, and I took a solo pilgrimage. Walking through the reconstructed Ponderosa, tears welled as props and costumes became relics of a life lived in extremes. I paused before a lifelike statue of Haas, mid-laugh, and remembered him telling me, "Son, love wildly." In that humbling hour, layers of grief and distance peeled away, revealing a longing to connect his courage with my own truth. I found myself in a dusty corner of the commissary scribbling notes on a yellow pad. I needed to share Dan's full story, his private struggles, his unwavering integrity, and the lessons he left behind. I drafted an outline for this interview, vowing to reveal the man behind the legend, to show how he turned pain into purpose, and to honor a legacy more nuanced than any script. Deciding to speak publicly felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Fans would wrestle between nostalgia for Haas and curiosity about Dan Blocker the man. Tonight, I sit before these cameras with no retakes, no makeup, and no script. I'm simply Dirk, a son determined to set the record straight. Up next, I'll dig into the behind-the-scenes battles with the network, the late-night hospital confessions, and the standout moment when my father's life taught me the true cost of living for others. One of the toughest battles happened behind closed doors, away from any camera lens. 2 days before Bonanza's season finale, a memo arrived from network headquarters demanding my father perform in frigid conditions for a climactic outdoor scene. The script called for Haas Cartwright to lead a midnight rescue in icy fog, but Dad's chest pains had already forced a doctor's warning just 72 hours earlier. Executives pushed for a retake, dangerous for a man whose heart was a ticking clock hidden under suspenders. He's a star, they argued. Stars don't collapse. My father insisted he could handle it. His loyalty to his craft and his audience outweighed his fear. That night, he slipped past makeup artists, applied fake frostbite makeup to his cheeks, and stepped into a howling wind. I watched from the shadows, knowing each scripted heroism came at the cost of his own health. After the shoot wrapped, Dan returned home bruised not only physically but spiritually. He pulled me aside in our ranch kitchen, cedar walls warm with nostalgia. "Son," he said quietly, voice rasping, "I love giving people hope through Haas. But sometimes hope costs more than it should." He lifted a trembling hand to his chest, revealing fresh scars from a hidden stent. In that moment, the cost of living for others revealed itself, not in applause but in private exhale, the ache of sacrifice. He poured 2 cups of sweet tea, his hands unsteady, and urged me to listen closely. When you give everything, never lose yourself. That confession echoed in my mind as I penned the first lines of this interview. In the weeks that followed, Dad negotiated with network lawyers in hospital waiting rooms. He refused to sign release forms unless guaranteed rest days and medical support on set. Producers bristled at the delay, concerned thousands of dollars of filming time might vanish. Yet he stood firm, reminding them that integrity trumps production speed. I overheard the negotiations, legal jargon, production budgets, veiled threats about recasting. His perseverance forced the brass to relent. By the 8th hour of discussion, they agreed to a compromise: 3 rest days and a medical team on standby. That small victory set a precedent. Even icons need boundaries. When the cameras rolled again, the crew noticed a subtle change in Dan's performance. His smile carried more weight. His body language held a hint of fatigue, but his eyes glimmered with clear purpose. He wasn't just embodying Haas. He was embodying a man who chose authenticity over illusion. On that final take, I stood beside the director and saw Dad pause mid-scene to wipe sweat from his brow before delivering the iconic line. Life's toughest trails make the strongest writers. The director's cut kept the unscripted break. It felt genuine, a testament to his human fragility and resolve. Tonight, as I share these moments with you, it's to honor the man behind the suspenders. The network battles taught me that heroism isn't always found in showdowns, but in quiet stands for one's well-being. The late-night confessions taught me that truth can be tender and transformative. And the cost of living for others became a compass guiding my life. To fight for compassion, to set boundaries, and to cherish every heartbeat. My father's legacy now includes not only Haas Cartwright's warm heart, but also Dan Blocker's unwavering courage in the face of personal sacrifice. This is the real story fans never saw, and one I'm proud to finally share. That I invite you to remember that every legend has a human story behind it. In future segments, I'll explore how these unseen battles shaped our family's bonds and the enduring power of authenticity. Stay tuned. Thank you all, truly, always as the cameras cut. I found myself wandering back onto that dusty soundstage where my father once stood tall in leather boots and suspenders. The spotlights were off now, but the echoes remained. Creaking floorboards, distant hooves, and the murmur of crews calling action. It was here, years ago, that Haas Cartwright's heart beat strong for every child who tuned in on Sunday nights. Today, I return not as a co-star or background extra, but as a son eager to close the gap between legend and reality. I slip my hand into the pocket of my worn denim jacket and pull out a faded envelope marked, "To Dirk, from DLB," written in my father's neat script. Inside, I find a stack of yellowed letters, notes he sent me when I first left home for college teaching. In one, he writes, "Son, remember that courage is not the absence of fear, but choosing purpose over pain." Reading those words under the soft glow of a single overhead bulb, I feel the weight of his journey converge with my own. Here, where reels of film lay in silent piles, his advice seems as vital as any stage direction. I recall the day I first dared to share his story in a magazine article, tentative, half-formed, fearful of uprooting cherished memories. Critics praised my honesty but questioned my motives. "Is this exploitation?" they asked. Yet I pressed forward, driven by a conviction that authenticity outlasts any whisper of scandal. That conviction was born from late-night discussions with Michael Landon on my deathbed. I mean, on my father's deathbed, when Michael, tears in his eyes, applauded Dan's insistence on integrity. "Dan taught me more off-camera than any scene ever could," Landon whispered before retreating into hallowed wood-paneled walls. From him, I learned that true heroism unfolds in unscripted moments of empathy. Step by step, I guided the museum curator through the treasure trove of personal artifacts I donated. My father's weathered stubble razor, a tattered script annotated with stints and medical reminders scrawled in the margins, even a single brown boot scuffed from 100 Ponderosa rides. Visitors gasp when they see where he once rested his weary foot. I hear them murmur, "I never knew Haas had scars." That reaction underscores the chasm between on-screen bravado and the toll of a man who refused to yield for the sake of art. Then there are the fan letters, thousands of them, expressing gratitude for a fictional cowboy's simple wisdom. Yet buried within their bright pages are hidden gems. One letter from a veteran who credited Haas's kindness with saving his marriage, another from a teacher who used Haas's lessons to guide troubled kids. I hold these letters close, tracing headlines like "Haas taught me to forgive," and realize that my father's greatest role was never scripted. It was the quiet act of giving hope when the world dimmed. In a private corner of the exhibit, I've arranged a looping video montage. Dan's most memorable moments intercut with candid home movies, horseback rides with me as a boy, porch conversations in Los Angeles twilight, birthday candles flickering in our kitchen. When visitors pause here, I meet their eyes and share what they can't see on screen. The chest pains he hid beneath layers of makeup, the hospital visits tucked between seasons, the nights he refused to rest until our family felt safe. At the end of my tour, I stand before a simple plaque: Dan Blocker, actor, father, friend, unsung hero. Underneath, a handwritten quote: "Courage is choosing purpose over pain." I pause, letting those words settle in the quiet hush. The cameras capture my reflection in the glass, a silhouette merging father and son. I draw in a slow breath and say softly, "Now you know the full story." Men can wear suspenders and hide their bruises, but real strength comes from vulnerability. Just as I step away, the producer whispers, "Dirk, wrap it up." I look into the lens, smile gently, and offer a final promise. In our next deep dive, I'll introduce you to the women in our family, my mother and my daughters, whose resilience sustained us all. Until then, remember, legends aren't just born, they're forged in honesty. Then I nod, the red light fades, and the set falls silent once more. This time, with the truth finally in focus. Behind the scenes of every nostalgic fan reunion lies an undercurrent of discovery. In the weeks after that studio revelation, letters poured in, handwritten notes on lined paper, postcards with Ponderosa Ranch scenes, even detailed emails from cardiologists inspired by my father's hidden battle. One message, from a young heart patient in Nebraska, described how learning of Dad's silent struggle gave her the courage to insist on proper care. Another, from a former network executive, confessed long-standing regret for pushing him past safe limits. As news outlets picked up on these heartfelt responses, I realized the true impact of sharing Dan's story. It rippled far beyond my living room or the old Bonanza sets. It showed that vulnerability, when met with compassion, can ignite healing in unexpected places. My wife, Susan, became my anchor during this surge of emotion. Every evening, we sorted through fan mail together, reading letters aloud and pausing to reflect on moments we never fully grasped before. She noticed how many writers voiced gratitude for a man they'd never met, someone whose off-screen sacrifices lent them solace. One afternoon, Susan placed a single letter on my desk, an envelope from a retired teacher in Alaska who'd watched Bonanza reruns with her late husband. The teacher wrote that understanding Dan's private perseverance had transformed her grief into gratitude, inspiring her to record her own memoirs for her grandchildren. That letter, so simple, crystallized for me the power of authenticity. Around that time, I received an invitation to speak at the annual Western Television Heritage Symposium. Program organizers wanted me to discuss not just Bonanza's cultural legacy, but the real-life challenges behind the scenes. Standing at the podium before 1,000 historians, scholars, and fans, I felt a familiar flutter of nerves, the same I'd had as a teenager auditioning for small TV roles. Yet this was different. My words could reshape perceptions of a man I loved. When I began, cameras rolled and live streams pinged around the globe. My father, I told the audience, was more than a fictional cowboy. He was a man who fought for every moment of life, on screen and off. In that moment, I realized that sharing his humanity was itself a tribute stronger than any reenacted scene. That speech led to a new chapter in my mission, collaborating on a documentary titled Haas Beyond the Cartwrights. Filmmakers, moved by my account, approached me to co-produce a film weaving archival footage, newly discovered letters, and interviews with medical staff who'd treated Dad. We traced his life from childhood classrooms where he first honed that booming voice through recitations to his final days balancing stints and scripts. I worked closely with editors to ensure no sensationalism crept in. This was a story anchored in respect, not rumor. As clips came together, I saw the truth emerge. Dan's legacy was defined by love, resilience, and a quiet heroism that transcended television. Meanwhile, my own heart followed in Dad's footsteps of service. Inspired by his perseverance, I volunteered with a local cardiac support group, sharing our family's journey to encourage patients and caregivers. In community centers, I spoke candidly about recognizing early symptoms, advocating for oneself in medical settings, and the emotional toll of chronic conditions. I found purpose in guiding others through the maze of scans and consultations, an echo of Dad negotiating with producers, advocating for his own health. More than acting or teaching, this felt like the most authentic role I'd ever played. Through it all, fans continued to write. One person sent a package of warm winter socks, thanking me for keeping Dad's Christmas spirit alive in heart-wrenching seasons. Another donated to a Children's Heart Foundation in my father's name, requesting that I present the check in his honor. Each gesture, whether big or small, reaffirmed that revealing our vulnerabilities doesn't weaken legacies, it enriches them. In telling Dan's concealed struggles, I wasn't tarnishing a myth but humanizing a hero, inviting others to find strength in shared imperfections. Now, as I prepare for the documentary's premiere, I reflect on the journey from silent son to storyteller. I've learned that every legacy is a tapestry woven from both bright highlights and hidden threads. In the next segment, I'll delve into how my father's optimism paved my own path forward, how his last conversation with me echoed in my first major public address, and the single moment when I understood that, even in heartbreak, love endures. The premiere night arrived with a hush more profound than any on-set clap I'd experienced as a youthful extra. Dirk's documentary, Haas Beyond the Cartwrights, glowed on a giant screen in a packed theater. I sat beside my wife and daughters, holding a single letter in my pocket. The last one Dad wrote me a month before he passed away. In neat script he had penned, "Courage is choosing purpose over pain." Those words echoed as the lights dimmed and the opening credits rolled. As the first images flickered to life, I remembered Dad's laughter ringing through our living room after a long day of filming. He believed every setback was a setup for a greater comeback. That belief shaped my own journey, from teaching in rural Texas to firefighting rescue missions and ultimately sharing his story on camera. His optimism became my compass when fear threatened to overshadow purpose. In the middle of the film, cameras captured me standing on the Heritage Symposium stage, voice sturdy as I recounted his silent battles. My first major public address began with that same phrase he'd whispered in old hospital corridors: "Courage is choosing purpose over pain." When I spoke those words to scholars and fans alike, I felt his presence beside me, supporting each syllable. Audience members looked on, some with tears, others with pens poised to capture every note of authenticity. That moment crystallized the power of his legacy, not the scripted exploits of Haas Cartwright, but Dan Blocker's unwavering moral backbone. Later, the documentary revealed the final pages of his life, the compassion he extended to hospital staff, the quiet prayers he offered for my future, and the hope he refused to surrender. I watched those scenes with bated breath, my heart racing as I saw him embrace mortality with the same tenacity he brought to every role. During production, I discovered a cassette recording he made on the eve of his bypass surgery. His voice was calm, almost playful, saying, "If I can't ride the Ponderosa again, I'll ride in your heart forever." That line became the film's emotional anchor, reminding viewers that love transcends any mortal boundary. When the credits ended, the theater erupted in applause. I rose, holding Dad's letter high, and spoke one final line from that cassette: "Ride in your heart forever." The audience rose too, stamping their feet in gratitude for a story that blended Western tradition with timeless humanity. In that standing ovation, I felt a single truth settle deep. Heartbreak does not signal an ending, but a chance to rediscover love anew. In the days that followed, letters continued to pour in, accounts of families healing, veterans finding purpose, survivors learning that vulnerability could be heroic. I realized Dad's optimism had sparked a cascade of healing beyond anything he or I could have imagined. His final conversation, recorded yet timeless, echoed in every life touched by his story. Now, as I stand at 67, I carry his words like a map. I mentor new filmmakers, volunteers at cardiac organizations, and speak at memorial events where his memory lives on. Each time I share his story, I see that single moment when I understood that, even in heartbreak, love endures. That moment came when I first heard his voice from that tape recorder and felt tears transform into resolve. His optimism paved every step of my opening act, guiding me from shadows into a spotlight of genuine purpose. Moving, I plan to carry his torch into realms, launching a mentorship program for aspiring storytellers, producing educational series about resilience. Dad's optimism remains the spark that lights every path I choose. This is the torch he handed me, bright,